Tonight, I want to share news of a genuine victory, one that arrived quietly, late in the legislative day, and was largely drowned out by louder stories about Venezuela and looming impeachment drama. Still, it should not be dismissed. What took place on the Senate floor this afternoon marks the first visible fracture in the wall of authoritarian overreach that has loomed over our democracy for the past year. Earlier today, the United States Senate, joined by a decisive bloc of 12 Republicans, moved to stop the president's attempted executive takeover of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. More striking still, a federal court here in Washington, D.C., has imposed what legal experts describe as exceptionally severe penalties on the Trump Organization and the president's personal estate for the misuse of federal funds. Tied to that effort, reported fines approaching $75 million. At a glance, this could be mistaken for a mundane fight over a building, another squabble about property, arts funding, or a headline that reads something like, "Trump fails to rename cultural landmark." But this was never about bricks or a marquee. It is about the nation's character and the fragile, often opaque financial tactics propping up this administration. What follows will uncover the parts of this episode most people haven't seen, why the president became so intent on controlling a cultural institution, why the courts responded with such extraordinary sanctions, and why the Senate, an institution that has frequently stood by him, finally decided this was the line that could not be crossed. To understand how we arrived at this moment, the sequence of events matters. Roughly 3 months ago, not long after the Department of Government Efficiency began dismantling the National Endowment for the Arts, President Trump signed a largely overlooked executive directive. It was framed publicly as a routine infrastructure renewal effort. Buried in its language, however, was a claim that the Kennedy Center was deteriorating and mismanaged, an assertion widely disputed, yet used as justification for swift executive control. What followed went far beyond renovation. The objective was a wholesale transformation of the institution itself. The plan proposed dissolving the congressionally mandated bipartisan board of trustees and replacing it with a new council composed entirely of administration loyalists. Names floated included figures such as Steve Bannon and Kash Patel, individuals who would effectively decide what forms of art were deemed sufficiently patriotic for public consumption. There were even proposals to rechristen the Grand Foyer as the Mega Hall of Liberty. Educational outreach initiatives, programs that bring jazz, theater, and cultural exposure to underserved children were slated for elimination, replaced by programming aligned with 1,776 commission-style messaging. Put plainly, this amounted to an attempted hostile takeover of American culture. A living memorial honoring a president associated with service, intellect, and public responsibility was to be reshaped into a reflection of one man's personal brand. At this point, the behavior moved beyond ethical misconduct and into potential criminal territory. That shift is precisely what the Senate Intelligence Committee identified, culminating in today's decisive vote. After reviewing the financial disclosures and scrutinizing the proposed contracts, a clear pattern emerged. The so-called Kennedy Center revitalization was never meant to be handled by independent, vetted construction firms. Instead, project oversight was assigned to a shell company operating within the World Liberty Financial Krypto project, an entity with direct ties to the Trump family. The plan involved routing approximately $400 million in taxpayer funds originally earmarked for emergency infrastructure through this company, effectively recycling management fees back into the president's own orbit. This financial architecture explains the scale of today's penalties. The court determined that preliminary transfers had already begun before Congress granted any authorization, an unmistakable violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. It undermined the separation of powers and, more fundamentally, breached the public trust. The judge's language was unequivocal. The ruling emphasized that the executive branch is not entitled to use the federal treasury as a personal fund for vanity-driven projects. The $75 million penalty is more than a fine, it is restitution. It represents the judiciary's clear demand that the money be returned. Which brings us to the Senate itself. For much of the past year, Republican senators have twisted themselves into knots to defend what would once have been indefensible, rationalizing the dismissal of an FBI director, overlooking controversial surveillance practices, and maintaining silence in the face of atrocities abroad. So what shifted? Why did a bloc of Republicans, at this particular moment, choose to break ranks and side with Democrats to halt such an aggressive consolidation of power? It had nothing to do with a newfound passion for the arts. The real reason is the vulnerability I cautioned you about just yesterday. In Washington, authority rests as much on perception as on position. When major donors quietly withdrew hundreds of millions of dollars from the president's political committees last month, it sent an unmistakable message to party leaders. The vessel was no longer stable. These senators are already studying the terrain ahead of the 2026 midterms. What they see is a president under siege, politically exposed, surrounded by investigations and hemorrhaging support. They see not an asset but a growing liability. Their vote was a signal shot across the bow, a message from the Senate that said plainly, the machinery of government will not be used for personal enrichment. This episode marks one of the clearest signs yet that the president's grip on his own party is weakening. It is among the first real indications that the legislative branch is beginning to reclaim its constitutional control over federal spending. Still, it would be reckless to underestimate the danger ahead. A president who feels cornered, embarrassed in public, and hit with staggering financial penalties is not a diminished threat. Donald Trump has never accepted loss quietly. He does not interpret a Senate rebuke as a lawful check on authority, he interprets it as treachery. The next 48 hours matter. With the Kennedy Center now off the table and massive fines looming, his liquidity problems have only intensified. Pressure shapes behavior, and when access to taxpayer funds is cut off and donor networks dry up, attention inevitably shifts toward less regulated paths. Which brings us back to the warning about the crypto executive order. As conventional routes close, expect a sharper turn toward digital assets. Watch for executive actions that could be designed to manipulate or inflate the value of cryptocurrency holdings linked to him and his inner circle. Desperation does not retreat, it adapts. We may also witness emergency exceptions being granted to questionable foreign actors, oligarchs from Russia, the Gulf, or elsewhere, channeling money into private ventures under the pretense of legitimate investment. Today's fines represent a clear win for the rule of law, but they also raise the stakes. They increase the temptation to chase rapid financial gains over the long-term interests of the nation. The cultural consequences are equally significant. The president targeted the Kennedy Center because he understands a simple but powerful truth. Culture shapes politics. Controlling the story a nation tells about itself is a direct route to controlling the nation. His goal was to override John F. Kennedy's legacy, one built on civil rights, space exploration, and diplomacy with a narrative rooted in grievance, isolationism, and authoritarian impulses. The Senate may have stopped the physical takeover of the building, but it cannot end the larger struggle for influence over culture. That battle is playing out in schools where thousands of books are being banned. It is happening in universities where federal funding is threatened for programs that confront uncomfortable truths. The attempt to seize the Kennedy Center was merely the most visible tip of the iceberg, a symbolic flashpoint. By defending it, we have demonstrated that resistance is not only possible, it can prevail. To the citizens who have felt powerless over the past year, I want to speak directly. I know how easy it is to feel like the institutions designed to protect us are faltering. I know the disillusionment of seeing civil service structures weakened and cultural institutions reshaped in ways once unimaginable. But look at what has occurred. Look at the scoreboard. A president reached to reshape one of America's cultural crown jewels, and forces in Congress pushed back. A controversial renaming effort widely regarded by legal experts as unauthorized was met with resistance and legal challenge from both lawmakers and the Kennedy family. Yes, the fight over the Kennedy Center has been contentious and polarizing, but the institution still bears its original name under federal law, and Congress has reinforced that designation. Even as tensions remain high, we must remain vigilant about the battles ahead. The work of defending democracy and preserving the constitutional balance is far from complete. Pressing challenges remain, from ongoing investigations and political accountability around national crises to surveillance concerns, civil liberties, and the overall health of our institutions. These are not abstract issues. They touch the daily lives of citizens and strike at the integrity of our nation itself. The push to reshape America's cultural landscape through board overhauls, renaming efforts, or shifts in programming reflects a deeper struggle over what this nation truly stands for. Culture is not peripheral. It flows upstream into politics. Those who control the stories we tell, the symbols we honor, and the spaces where communities gather wield profound influence over how a nation understands itself. We have already seen ticket sales drop and artists hesitate in response to these pressures, underscoring just how far-reaching these battles are across communities. Let's be clear, this moment offers hope, but not comfort. Real victories demand ongoing effort. The fact that voices across parties and communities are speaking up proves that resistance still matters. But words alone are not enough. Action must follow. We cannot safeguard one symbol while ignoring broader threats to our constitutional order. Across Congress, the courts, and the executive branch, facts must guide us. Every citizen deserves transparency and accountability. Whether it concerns the governance of public institutions, the spending of taxpayer funds, or the limits of executive power, Those representatives who stood firm against controversial changes in one corner of government must show the same courage across all arenas. Defending our democratic norms is not selective. It must be complete and unwavering. And let this serve as a clear message to those in power. We are watching the money. We are watching the contracts. We are watching the executive orders. We will not allow the nation's treasures, cultural, civic, or constitutional, to be liquidated piece by piece for private gain. The Kennedy Center still stands, its mission preserved. That should remind us that if one cherished institution can be defended against overreach, so too can the Republic itself. But this work is demanding and the hour is late. Stay engaged. Examine the records. Track each development. Make your voice heard. Share the truth and the facts with your neighbors, your communities, and across every corner of civic life. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation, constant vigilance, and courage from every one of us.